All right. I think we are live. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday night. Hope you have a good weekend in store. As before, we have Den who is helping out with moderation and in the comments. If you see something from me, he's going to sign it Den so you know it's him. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, uh, you can always let us know. Please take care of that. Like, subscribe, donate if you want. You can leave a super like as well. And if you want to donate, that's the place to do it. And if you give anything via YouTube and leave a super like, we will make sure your questions get answered. Thanks to all of you on YouTube. We just surpassed 100,000 subscribers sometime last week. That's cool and exciting. Very cool. So, okay, there's so much to talk about. I want to jump right into it, and I want to talk about the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, because everyone who talks about the stuff we talk about is talking about Mike Johnson this week. And I'm going to go into this assuming that the people watching this may just know something about how this guy got elected Speaker of the House, but I'm assuming you don't know anything about him. So that's where I'm coming from on this. The thing that all of you, I think, need to know about Mike Johnson, the Republican that got elected Speaker of the House this week, unanimously among Republicans, is that he may be the biggest Christian nationalist politician to get to this level of politics that we've ever seen. For those of you who are as old as I am, you remember when John McCain chose Sarah Palin to be his running mate in 2008. And one of the many reasons that she was such a disaster for him is because she was so heavily into Jesus and like weirdly so. And seemed like she was a creationist and she wanted to put her religious beliefs into law and she was going to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. And John McCain wasn't exactly a big health nut and he was getting older. That was a concern in 2008. And now you have this guy, Mike Johnson, who is now two people away from the presidency. And that's also scary. So the question I want to try to answer here is the two questions. What exactly does he believe? And how the hell did he get this high up in politics while the mainstream media has mostly downplayed or ignored all of his crazy Christian beliefs? That's what I'm hoping we can answer. I don't know, for those of you who follow the judicial side of things, maybe you're familiar with the name Leonard Leo. And if you're not, he likes it that way. Leonard Leo is kind of the Svengali of right-wing judicial nominees. He's the guy who's basically handpicked the last three Supreme Court justices that Trump appointed. He got so many of his Federalist Society picks to be appointed, nominated, and then approved by GOP senators to have lifetime appointments on the bench. Leonard Leo is the reason our whole judicial system has taken this scary rightward shift. He's the guy behind it. And most people who don't pay attention to law have no idea who he is. That's what I think Mike Johnson is too. Like a behind the scenes guy who wants to shift everything to the right. And now, finally, he's in a position where he can help make that happen. And I'm also worried because now that he's in that position, it's far too late to stop a guy like this. So, and the thing is, there's no shortage of right wing extremists in the Republican Party. Those of us who follow politics know who a lot of them are because they always seek out the spotlight. They never shy away from talking about their Christian beliefs. They're also sloppy in their rhetoric because their speeches resemble church revival services. They use every media appearance to tell you about Jesus. And it's creepy if you're not Christian and probably even if you are. But one of the interesting things is after Mike Johnson got chosen to be speaker, there were so many articles with the headlines like, who is Mike Johnson? Let's find out. Here's 55 things you might want to know about the guy because you probably know zero. Even Senator Susan Collins of Maine was like, I'm going to have to Google who this guy is. So he's not familiar unless you're just addicted to like Fox News. Uh, but this guy has promoted just the most extremist right wing positions for decades without really getting attacked for it in the national press because he mostly functioned behind the scenes. His name would appear in articles, maybe, but always like in the fourth paragraph. He was never the main character in any of these things. So I'm going to start running through a list of a lot of his more insane positions. And I have a bunch of tabs I'm going to show you along the way here. So let's start with this. Um, Here's one. This is him from 2022. I'm going to hone in on this part here. And this is the part I want to show you. Most people today, this is from 2022, Mike Johnson on Facebook. Most people today who insist upon a rigid separation between church and state are unaware that the phrase derives not from the Constitution, but from a personal letter that President Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802. Right there, I mean, he is correct. It doesn't appear in the Constitution. No one was saying it did, but okay, let's keep going here. Thomas Jefferson explained that because religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, the language of the First Amendment is a vital safeguard for our rights of conscience. I'm going to just skip down here for a second. Jefferson clearly did not mean that metaphorical wall of separation between church and state was to keep religion from influencing issues of civil government. To the contrary, it was meant to keep the federal government from impeding the religious practices of citizens. The founders wanted to protect the church from an encroaching state, not the other way around. In other words, the church is not allowed to tell, I'm sorry, the state is not allowed to tell churches how to function, but he's saying churches can absolutely tell the government how to run, which is wildly off the mark. It's not what Jefferson meant, and we know that based on his other writing. Uh, it's also not how courts have interpreted the law over the years, over decades and decades of case law. They have very clearly said, the government has no business establishing religion, promoting one religious view over another, or, and this is important, religion over non-religion. The government's supposed to stay out of the religion game, and churches shouldn't have any special privileges when it comes to telling the government how to function. So that one's disturbing. Let me jump. I'm going to get back here for a second. Let me jump to a different thing he pointed out. He has a podcast with his wife. And one of the many things he said on this podcast with his wife, this is from Politico. On occasion, Kelly Johnson will tee up her husband for an answer. Why are we the freest, most powerful, most successful, most benevolent nation in the history of the world? And why does every other nation on the planet look to us for leadership and even expect it to us? She asked in one episode. And if you've ever seen, like, what was that HBO show, Newsroom? Like, you're waiting for the guy to respond to say, I promise you, a lot of nations do not think we're the most powerful, most benevolent, most successful nation ever. I promise you, no other nation's motto is we're number two. Okay? They do not think we are amazing. We are awful at healthcare. We're awful at religious freedom, for real. So they're not looking to us like that. But her husband responds, explaining that America is the only country in the world founded upon a creed or a religious statement of faith. What? We're not. There's no statement of faith. We're not founded on, like, in God we trust. That was the 1950s. We started jamming that in places. So what is he talking about? I don't know. But we're not founded on a statement of faith. So he's absolutely wrong on that. Here's one you may have seen in the news. Mike Johnson famously represented Answers in Genesis, the creationists, Ken Ham, Ark Encounter, because one of the things that happened a few years ago when Ark Encounter first opened is that they really wanted tax breaks from the state. And they said, our religious ministry here that's opening a giant Noah's Ark replica, we're a tourist attraction. So we should be eligible for tax breaks as a tourist destination, because Kentucky has a whole thing in place where if you're bringing people to the state of Kentucky, they want to give you like a fraction of your ticket sales back to you as an incentive for bringing people to Kentucky. And that's a fine program. The reason Kentucky did not want to give that incentive to Ark Encounter is one, it's a religious ministry, and that's a game they don't want to play. And two, Ark Encounter and Answers in Genesis, which oversees it, they discriminate in hiring. They have a no Jews allowed policy when it comes to who they hire to work at Ark Encounter. And they have a no atheist policy and a no progressive Christian policy. Well, Mike Johnson worked with Ken Ham to try to change that. Here's an article about that. And this is the part you want to see. Answers in Genesis. Let me get the date on this. This is from 2015, updated a couple years later. Answers in Genesis is being represented by attorneys from Freedom Guard and the Center for Religious Expression. Appearing with him in the video, Freedom Guard attorney Mike Johnson, now the Speaker of the House, described his nonprofit organization as a public interest law firm dedicated to the defense of religious liberty in America. Johnson said the Ark Encounter project was blocked from Kentucky's incentive program, despite meeting the necessary criteria. The necessary criteria being they're a tourist attraction, basically. And the sad thing is, even though this went back and forth in the courts for a little while, ultimately Ark Encounter won. Ark Encounter was able to get tax breaks, and you could see from the end of this, not this article, let me jump to a different one here. There we go. This is from Guardian, but it's the same coverage here. The case was won, and the Ark Encounter, featuring a vast ark-like structure meant to depict that in the biblical flood narrative, as described in the book of Genesis, it went ahead. This is the important part. By 2017, it had received $18 million in tax incentives, according to the Huffington Post. And they've gotten that money for several years after that as well. And so, just to give you an idea, like Mike Johnson helped Ark Encounter win back millions and millions of dollars, even though they discriminate against Jews and atheists and Hindus and Muslims and all of that. And Mike Johnson's the reason Ark Encounter is so filthy rich. Here's another thing to show you. I'm just running through a list of tabs here, all right? This is another one. This is from Warren Throckmorton, who's been covering a guy named David Barton, who is a famous pseudo-historian, doesn't have a real degree, but basically David Barton's whole shtick is he goes around the country to every gullible conservative Christian he can find, and he says, I'm an expert in the Founding Fathers, and the Founding Fathers loved Jesus, and they wanted this country to be built on Jesus's name, and all of it's a lie, and actual historians know it's a lie, but very gullible Christians believe every word of it. And by gullible Christians, that includes politicians like Mike Johnson. And check this out. This is from Warren Throckmorton again. Representative Johnson has been a longtime fan of David Barton. In 2021, Johnson praised David Barton in a talk to a group of state legislators. I just want to say at the outset, I'm grateful to Wall Builders, which is Barton's organization, and David and Rick and everybody involved. And I was introduced to David Barton and his ministry a quarter century ago, and it has had such a profound influence on me and my work and my life and everything I do. So I'm just so grateful you guys continue to sow into this work and help equip the soldiers on the front lines. And so thanks to all of you for being willing to serve in this critical time for the country. I mean, just think about what that means for a second. That means Mike Johnson probably believes, like true, sincere believer, that our country was founded as a Christian nation, that all those founding fathers wanted to create like a safe space for Jesus. Like that's what he thinks because of what David Barton lies about, that's what he believes. By the way, David Barton is such a liar that like a decade ago when he wrote a book about Thomas Jefferson called The Jefferson Lies, I believe, his Christian book publishers were like, dude, you're lying so much in this book. We need to take it off the bookshelves and stop distributing it. And you would think that sort of thing, when even Christian publishers are like, too many lies in this book. The same people who publish the Bible are like, David Barton, you are lying too much. When that book is taken off the shelves, you would think Christians would be like, okay, David Barton is not trustworthy. But no, he's been pulling this stunts, all of this ever since. And Mike Johnson loves David Barton. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. Here's another thing Johnson did. When Democrats took over the House a couple of years ago, like 2018 ish, one of the things that happened is that when Democrats were in charge of subcommittee hearings, which happen all the time in Congress, if someone who was a witness had to take an oath and they didn't say, "So help me God" at the end of their oath, the Democrats in charge are like, yeah, we don't care. That's fine, dog. Like, just say the main part of the oath. Don't care about the religious thing. Let's move on to the work at hand. Mike Johnson, who was in Congress at the time then, was so mad about that, he actually filed legislation later on. Check this out. He filed legislation amending the rules of the House of Representatives to require a specific oath be administered to any witnesses appearing before a committee. And you could see from the text here, this is the part that matters. This is the oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. This is a thing he's wasting his time on. Like, anyone could have just said it if they wanted to. But no, he wanted to make sure people who didn't feel comfortable saying that would be forced to say it because, his God needs the praise or something like that. So that's disturbing. Here's another thing he did. He promoted a conservative Christian sponsored Bible course in public schools. And there's been this push over, it goes in and out over the years, but basically there's been a push to get public schools to offer an elective to students where they can learn about the Bible as literature. And if it's taught correctly, that might actually be valuable. But the specific curriculum that Mike Johnson was promoting in Louisiana was widely criticized for having evangelical zeal and treating the Bible as, quote, an accurate record of history. Like, you can't do that. That's too subjective. You need to make it objective. And in response to the critics who said you're only promoting one version of the Bible, this is what Mike Johnson said in response to all that criticism. He says, yes, the Supreme Court allows for the Bible to be taught in public schools, but only objectively as part of a secular program of education. Johnson defended the Bible course on behalf of the Louisiana Family Forum, which is a right-wing Christian group. He argued that the Supreme Court did not say you have to discuss everybody's view on the Bible. That would be politically correct to treat all religious traditions equally, which is another way of just saying, you guys, my version of the Bible, my interpretation of Christianity, the Christianity that my church teaches, that's the only right way to teach students. And we're going to just call that the Bible. Like, there's only one version and it's mine, and that's the only one that counts. Even, again, no one hates progressive Christians more than conservative Christians. You know what I mean? But again, this is Mike Johnson. A couple other things. This is an interesting one. I did not see this covered in a lot of articles about him this week. Mike Johnson supported, there was a Louisiana school district that decided, remember when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling during the national anthem back in the days when he was allowed to play football? A Louisiana school district instituted a policy saying student athletes were required to stand during the national anthem, which seems kind of unfair to those kids. Like, why would they have to do it? That makes no sense. But Mike Johnson was the guy who supported that move. And this is what he said. Let me pull this up for you right here. There we go. Here's what he said at the time to critics who said you can't force students to say this stuff. He said, the board is doing the right thing. They're going to make a statement that they certainly respect the dignity of all students and their religious freedoms, but at the same time, we don't have to sacrifice who we are as Americans. The Bossier School Board is not going to bend over and bow to the whims of these atheist, radical, secular groups. And that's who's picking on the Bossier School Board again. These groups are on a search and destroy mission for all things religious, and now by extension, all things patriotic. Which is weird because it's not just atheist groups saying you can't force kids to pledge allegiance, to say the anthem. They have a right to not do that. And what is he doing? He's basically saying if you don't stand for the pledge or say the national anthem, you're unpatriotic. Notice that he's basically equating atheists with non-patriots as if atheists are incapable of loving the country. And that's messed up for all sorts of reasons too. And also, again, if you value freedom, if you value the First Amendment at all, then forcing kids to stand up and say the national anthem or stand up, even if they don't say it, just, I don't understand how that's patriotic. Like, you would think true love of the country, one, you shouldn't have to sing the national anthem or say it or pretend to say it in order to prove that you're a good American. That's just stupid. I have much more respect for people who say, like Kaepernick, who says, I don't want to stand for the national anthem or sing it because our country needs to do better. I'm actually going to kneel in protest to highlight, using the one platform that I have, that we need to be doing better. I want our country to improve. That makes a lot more sense to me than the people who just blindly go along with the anthem or the pledge out of a sense of, well, I just have to do this, but I don't actually care what's being said. Why is that any better? I don't get that at all. But that's what Mike Johnson likes. Here's an interesting one, too. Some of you may remember this from like a decade ago. In Texas, there was a school district where the cheerleaders on the field used to hold banners up. I'm going to show you a picture of one of these here. They used to hold up these banners at football games, and it had Bible verses on them. But the reason the cheerleaders were holding the banners at this public high school is so the football players could burst through the banner as they ran onto the field before a game. And the reason this became an issue is because there's an open question as to whether that banner right there, is that the students' free expression of their religious beliefs, or is that a school-sponsored banner right there? And again, atheist groups were arguing, you're on the football field. The cheerleaders are wearing school uniforms. This is a school-sanctioned football game. Of course, that's representing the school district. That's an endorsement of religion. Mike Johnson, on the other hand, I want you to check out what he said about all this. Here we go. This is, at the time, Mike Johnson was representing Liberty Counsel, the right-wing Christian group. And here's what he said. We're writing to affirm that public school administrators are acting appropriately and lawfully when they allow student-led, student-initiated forms of speech, even if that speech happens to be religious in nature. No student should ever have to leave his or her religious beliefs or expression at the schoolhouse gate. Thanks to the precedent set with our victory in Kuntz, superintendents should feel empowered to resist the bullying tactics of atheist groups because federal and state law prohibiting government censorship of students' free speech is well established, which is just messed up because, again, if we were talking about any religion other than Christianity, the school district never would have been okay with it. You cannot put up, there is no God, have fun running through the banner, football players. They would never have let that happen. But again, it's always religious freedom when Christians do it, and it's always persecution when the districts or the church-state separation groups say, hey, remain neutral. But again, that is Mike Johnson. I'm running through. I swear, there's no shortage of these because this is what he's been doing his entire life. Check out this picture right here. This is, whoops, let me go back here for a second. Where did it go? There we go. This picture. This was sitting in a courtroom. I'm going to go back to a full screen here for a second. That image was seen in a courtroom in, I believe, Mississippi. And there was an argument as to, hey, that's a picture of Jesus. That shouldn't be in a government building. Well, Mike Johnson argued that that portrait of Jesus, sorry, that was in Louisiana. He said it was okay because the ideas expressed in this painting are not specific to any one faith, and they certainly don't establish a single state religion, which is weird because that was Jesus. I'm not sure how many different religions you think he represents there. Okay, here's another thing he has done. Okay, you guys all know about the Johnson Amendment. It's the IRS rule that basically says nonprofits which get a tax exemption, they're not allowed to use their nonprofit groups. If you're a church that's a nonprofit, you're not allowed to use your pulpit to tell people how to vote. The ACLU cannot send out a mailer saying everyone go vote for Joe Biden. They can't, and they don't. But churches, a lot of conservative Christian churches have been making the argument for years now that they should be allowed to tell their congregations how to vote and they should face no punishment for it. And the truth is, in reality, there have been a lot of pastors who have done that, like basically poking the bear, poking the IRS, saying, come after me, I dare you. And as far as we know, the IRS hasn't done anything to punish any of these people. But the rule is still technically in effect, the Johnson Amendment. Well, Mike Johnson has been pushing to get rid of it. And this is something that he said a couple of years ago. Representative Mike Johnson and another guy told the Values Voter crowd they supported weakening or repealing the Johnson Amendment. We need to unshackle the voice of the church again, said Johnson, who claimed the law silences and censors houses of worship. I'm going to pause there for a second. We need to unshackle the voice of the church again. First of all, don't use the language of slavery. You're not helping your case. Second, when have churches ever been silent? Never. They're never silent. I hear about pastors complaining and talking all the damn time. If only they were silent. They never are. The voice of the church is not in question ever. Anyway, Johnson said changing the law could be a game changer. And this other guy, the other guy said the voices on the left were never shackled. Now it's time to unshackle the voices on the right. Again, total BS. People on the right are never, ever suppressed or silenced. They have their own channels. They have their own fake Twitters. They have entire media houses to promote their BS. But again, it is more marketable to say you have been silenced and censored and canceled. That's where your comedy Netflix special comes from. So they got to pretend they're being suppressed. But that's another thing Mike Johnson has done. By the way, Mike Johnson has sponsored a bill in Congress to repeal the Johnson Amendment too. And then let me talk about a couple things you may have heard of at this point. Johnson is notoriously anti-gay. And to that end, let me show you this from the Christian Post. This is a guy, when he was a state representative in Louisiana, he defended the right of the Louisiana people to amend their constitution with the definition of marriage as the union of one man and one woman. The amendment also prohibited the recognition of same-sex unions from other states. So that's what he was trying to do as a state lawmaker, like put into place the only marriages that count is one man, one woman. I'm sure there was a parenthetical that said they shouldn't be related. Maybe we'll see. He also tried passing this bill over here that, as a state lawmaker, that permits faith-based anti-gay discrimination. Check out this little bit right here. Check this out. Oh, you know what? I'm going to skip this because I don't have this in front of me. I want to show you this. Here we go. This is an op-ed he wrote for a Louisiana newspaper in defense of the straight marriage only amendment. And I'm going to scroll down to what's right to your right side of his picture here. Same sex marriage selfishly and deliberately deprives children of either a mother or a father. Children need both. Homosexual relationships are inherently unnatural, and the studies clearly show are ultimately harmful and costly for everyone. The studies do not show that, by the way. Society cannot give its stamp of approval to such a dangerous lifestyle. If we change marriage for this tiny, modern minority, we will have to do it for every deviant group. This, kids, is what's called the slippery slope argument. Polygamists, polyamorists, pedophiles, and others will be next in line to claim equal protection. There will be no legal basis to deny a bisexual the right to marry a partner of each sex, or a person to marry his pet. Like, you're going back to anti-gay bigotry circa 2003 or whatever it was to listen to that sort of stuff. But this is the stuff he was peddling for such a long time. And by the way, some of you may know, like 20 years ago, the Supreme Court overturned sodomy laws in Texas. This is what Mike Johnson, where did it go? Here we go. This is what he wrote in an article. At that time, justices take swipe at American values. He was so mad at the Supreme Court for overturning, or in their Lawrence v. Texas ruling. Look at this paragraph right here. Prescriptions against sodomy have deep roots in religion, politics, and law. States have always maintained the right to discourage the evils of sexual conduct outside marriage, and the state is right to discriminate between heterosexual and homosexual conduct, since the latter cannot occur within the confines of marriage. I mean, it totally can, but that's besides the point. What is he saying here? He's saying anyone who has gay sex should be imprisoned. It should be illegal. This guy is now two people away from the presidency. So that's disturbing. I don't need to go through what he thinks about trans kids. It's not great. I'm going to whip through some of these. He opposes abortion. No exceptions, right? He wants to block access to birth control as well. He represented a college once that did not want to follow Obama-era guidelines requiring employers to provide contraception to employees. He also represented the state of Louisiana when it was trying to punish doctors who provided abortions unless they jumped through a few made-up hoops first. He has, as a member of Congress, co-sponsored several bills to ban abortion nationwide. And I want to show you this clip. And I swear, I think I'm done with all the roundup in a second here. Let me show you this clip of what he said when it comes to why mass shootings occur. And obviously, there was one in Maine this week, so this may be a clip you have seen. But listen to what he blames for why school shootings are happening.
Now, some of y'all were around in the late 60s. You remember that, what that was about. The counterculture revolution, Woodstock and drugs and peace and free love and all that, but more about the undermining of the foundations of religion and morality. Because if you remember, in the late 60s, we invented things like no-fault divorce laws. We invented the sexual revolution. We invented radical feminism. We invented legalized abortion in 1973, where the state, the government, sanctions the killing of the unborn. All these things happen because, as collectively as Americans, we began to get together in growing numbers and thumb our nose at the Creator and say, we don't believe that anymore. We're rejecting the founders' natural law philosophy in favor of moral relativism, and we are going down another path. Now, what we tolerate in moderation, our children excuse in excess. What happens when you fast forward another 30 or 40 years? Well, here's a picture's worth 1,000 words. Go to the next one for me. I mean, we know that we're living in a completely amoral society. And so people say, how can a young person go into their schoolhouse and open fire on their classmates? Because we've taught a whole generation, a couple of generations now of Americans, that there is no right and wrong, that it's about survival of the fittest, and you evolve from the primordial slime. Why is that life of any sacred value? Because there's nobody sacred to whom it's owed. None of this should surprise us. And it leads in the next slide for me, it leads into just chaos.
So, if you heard there, he blamed mass shootings on everything from no fault divorce laws, radical feminism, to Roe v. Wade, to evolution. We teach kids evolution, and that's why they do it. You know what? Other countries teach evolution and have feminists and have abortion rights and allow for divorces, and they don't have gun problems like we do because they are smart about guns, and we in America are idiots about it. But that's another thing this guy has done. I guess. And by the way, when he was asked this week about all these positions, he didn't say anything better. He offered prayer in response to the main shooting that happened this week. When Sean Hannity asked him this week about like your positions on the issues, Mike Johnson basically said, go pick, I'm quoting, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview, which doesn't explain much of anything because, as everybody knows, when you have a book that's that large and that vague, all interpretations are allowed. His positions are really whatever he wants them to be, and you can always justify whatever you want using cherry picked Bible verses. So, the point is, this guy is now the Speaker of the House. He gets to decide the agenda for the House, he gets to decide what bills they're going to vote on. And he has been working to implement the Christian nationalist agenda his entire career. He did it as an attorney for Christian legal groups. He did it as a state lawmaker in Louisiana. He's done it for years as a member of Congress. And now he can shift the party even more to the right. I guess if there's a silver lining, it's that he's so extreme. He's so right wing that I hope every campaign ad, no matter where you are in the country, for a House candidate, Senate candidate, what have you, is, hey, this Republican who's running to get reelected voted for Mike Johnson to be the Speaker of the House. And look at how crazy Mike Johnson is. Just like I hope all these ads say, hey, you vote for the Republican, then you're not going to have abortion rights in whatever state you're in. It's scary. It worked when it came to abortion rights. I hope Mike Johnson is also used as like a weapon in these ads because it's not okay. So the question that remains is, how the hell did this guy with these extreme views lasting so many decades, how come he was able to just get easily, unanimously elected as Speaker of the House? And to that point, let me show you one last thing here. This is from the New Yorker. A reporter asked a former GOP aide how moderate members, he says that loosely, I believe, moderate members of the GOP, could justify voting against Jim Jordan, but for Mike Johnson. Their politics are nearly indistinguishable. Johnson, who sits on Jordan's judiciary, once compared their relationship to being like Batman and Robin. And check this out. The aide replied, have you heard of Mike Johnson? That's it. That's it. That's what he has going for him. He's so generically named and he's been so anonymous over the years for people who don't pay attention like to the nitty-gritty details of these stories, that no one, like if I say Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have thoughts about her. If I say Lauren Boebert or Jim Jordan, you have thoughts about them. If I say Mike Johnson, even though he shares all those views, most Americans who even care about politics are going to be like, yeah, I don't know anything about this dude. So he probably can't be that bad. And the truth is, no, he's bad. He's way worse than you think. But because he's not obsessed with getting in front of the cameras or saying, the worst possible versions of these things, even if he did in the past, he was able to become Speaker of the House, second in line to the presidency. That is frightening. And I think that is one reason I think it's important to highlight when school board members say crazy things, even though it's very local news. It's important to highlight when Greg Locke or some other crazy pastor says something ridiculous, or even like fringy religious extremists. I know they seem like small potatoes, but often those are the people taking stepping stones to run for local office or statewide office or more. And it is important to document and highlight the crazy shit they say so that when you Google them or something, those crazy things come up. Just this week, if you live in Tennessee, in Franklin, Tennessee, there was a mayoral election. And one of the candidates was Gabrielle Hansen, who was basically a white supremacist embracing mega cultist who made the news because she was just lying and surrounding herself with the worst sorts of people. And because people kept tabs on all that stuff, Phil Williams, a local reporter especially, because they were relentless in documenting her extremism, she lost by a landslide this week. No one seriously reported on Mike Johnson for the years he's been doing this stuff, even as a congressman. And I think that's why he was able to skate to the top of the Republican Party at this point. Arguably the most powerful Republican in the country right now, except for maybe Donald Trump. I'll stop there. It's scary. Happy to take some questions while I grab a drink. What do we got here? According to some congresspeople, he was elected specifically because he is unremarkable and has no enemies. That's kind of, yeah, I'm surprised by that. It's true. A lot of members of Congress said he's a nice dude. He's nice to me. He's a very likable guy. He smiles, all that sort of thing. But I think by and large, a lot of those members of Congress just don't know him either. He's a solid conservative, so they like him. I don't think they realize how extreme his positions are on issues that matter to a lot of voters, specifically abortion, LGBTQ rights. They don't know that stuff about him, and they were willing to vote for him because they didn't know any better. I wonder if some of those moderate, and I don't think there are any Republican moderates, but I wonder if some of the less extreme Republicans might be second guessing their support for the guy because they are now linked to him, at least for next year's elections. But yeah, he should have enemies. He says a lot of horrible things. The fact that he doesn't have enemies when he says a lot of crazy shit tells you a lot about who's in the Republican Party. Hammond, how do you think Johnson being Speaker of the House will affect trans communities? This year alone, there have been 500 bills written in these United States. That target and discriminate against trans people. So that's scary. Here's what could happen. He could put up a vote for a bill that goes against trans people, that goes against gay people. They could put forth a lot of votes. They could force members of the House, including Democrats, to strategically take a position on issues like should trans people be allowed to use bathrooms, play sports, whatever, because Republicans think it'll hurt them if Democrats say yes to civil rights. Now, it won't pass in the Senate right now. Joe Biden's not going to sign it into law right now, and they don't have a veto-proof majority or anything. So those bills won't go anywhere, so there's that. I'm more worried about them shutting down the government, trying to not fund Ukraine or humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, things like that. That is more of a concern than actually substantively hurting LGBTQ people through Congress. They'll do it in the states, in red states for sure. I don't think he's going to be able to do it nationally. But think about this. The Senate is not necessarily in Democrats' hands after next year. That's going to be a tough House. That's going to be a tough one for them to keep in their hands. Donald Trump could win again. I mean, don't put it behind him. If that's the case, and Mike Johnson is still Speaker of the House, then you should be worried. All of us should be worried at that point. We're not there yet, but again, unless Democrats figure out how to use Mike Johnson to hurt as many Republicans who are running for election next year, then, I mean, they have to do it. Otherwise, this is going to be a problem. Ironically, one of the biggest reasons why people emigrated to America in search of religious freedom was because the church in their home countries had been given so much institutional power. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's ironic that we have religious freedom and yet Christianity and our government, conservative Christianity and our government are like intertwined. But you go to Europe and a lot of those countries have official national religions and no one cares because no one takes it that seriously. But you're right. Like when people immigrated here, religious freedom for a lot of people did make a big difference. And people like Mike Johnson are like, nope, to hell with it. Only my religion matters. And that's frightening. Their goal is only to own the libs. They got exactly who they wanted in charge. I agree, Den. Yeah, they just want to stick it to Democrats. But I don't know that this is the guy you want leading the charge, because he's bound to do interviews and he's going to say the Bible says this. Of course I'm a creationist. Of course I don't think gay people should have rights, trans people should have rights. Of course abortion. I mean, he's pushing a federal abortion ban that would apply to blue states as well. Um I don't know that Republicans got the guy they wanted, because he's not the dude you want representing your party on issues like abortion, which seem to be great for Democrats on the ballot right now. I think, I mean, I've seen people joking like Democrats also got who they want in charge because they got the crazy guy. But again, I think that's what we said about Donald Trump when he was the nominee. Like, Democrats got the opponent they wanted, and it's all funny until it's totally not. All right, I'm going to move on to the next story. I promise they're not nearly as long as that one. Let me jump to a happy one. This one made me smile. So one of the Democrats in Congress, his name is Max Frost. He's from Florida. He's the youngest member of Congress. I think he's like 14 years old or whatever the bare minimum is, but he's fantastic. And he's on the subcommittee for national security, the border, and foreign affairs. And this week, while they were in the chaos of choosing a speaker, there was actually a hearing on global religious persecution, which is important because there is religious persecution in other countries. And several of the Democrats said a lot of important things here. Robert Garcia, a guy I mentioned last week because he was a new member of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, he brought up how domestic anti-LGBTQ bigotry, our bigotry, often gets transported to other countries. That's a good point to bring up. Jamie Raskin, co-founder of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus and like the conscience of Democrats, he noted the problems with blasphemy laws overseas. Great. You had Jared Moskowitz, another Democrat, calling out the Republicans, how they are silent when their own leaders, including Trump, cozy up to neo-Nazis, Holocaust deniers, and white supremacists. So all of that, very important. But I want to play you a clip from what Max Frost said during this hearing, because he called out white Christian nationalism. And I'm only playing you a part. He spoke for about 5-10 minutes with questions to one of the witnesses. But let me play you a little bit of it, because he's just pointing out how radical our own country can be on this stuff.
And this threat to democracy has made its way to Congress. I mean, my colleague, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, has said, quote, Christian nationalism is actually a good thing. It is an identity that Republicans need to embrace, and I am being attacked by the godless left because I said I am a proud Christian nationalist, end quote. My colleague, Representative Lowen Boebert, said, quote, the church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk, end quote, junk being the Constitution and Bill of Rights. The Bible itself in 2 Corinthians actually warns us against this. Paul warned against this. He warned us against people who would preach of a Christ that differs from the true Christ that we learn about in the Bible. That's exactly what Christian nationalism is doing. I condemn religious extremism everywhere, globally and domestically. We have to recognize the threat it poses to our most sacred freedoms and root it out everywhere. And I think it's incumbent, especially upon us as Christians, and me as a Christian, to be at the forefront of the fight to ensure that white nationalism and Christian nationalism doesn't see the light of day. Thank you, and I yield back.
That was an awesome, awesome thing to say. I love the fact that he just said, as a Christian myself, it's important that people like me are at the forefront of the fight to ensure that white nationalism and Christian nationalism doesn't see the light of day. Do you like the subtle shade when he said in 2 Corinthians, there's a slap in the face to Donald Trump, who doesn't know how to read that. That's interesting. It actually, what Max Frost was saying echoed a speech. If you're on YouTube right now, I think you should open this up in another tab if you haven't seen it. Last year, there was a Michigan state senator, Mallory McMorrow, who delivered a speech after a Republican called her a groomer for supporting LGBTQ rights. And she pointed out that as a straight white Christian married suburban mom, it was her job to protect kids from being marginalized and targeted because they are not straight white and Christian. And her speech was fantastic too. But this is why it's so important to have Democrats in office. And by the way, like Max Frost said, he is a religious guy. Fine. Let's get more of those Christians speaking out against Christian nationalism. By the way, the first person you saw in that video clip was Amanda Tyler of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. And if you get a chance to watch the full clip, like, she answered those questions wonderfully too, saying very bluntly that Christian nationalism often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial subjugation, and that Christian nationalism is used by white supremacists to try to justify their violence. And given that white Christian nationalism played such a key role in the January 6th insurrection attempt, and it still wreaks havoc in GOP-led state legislatures, and there's now a Christian nationalist as Speaker of the House, it's never been more important for decent Christians to distance themselves from that ideology, to denounce people of their own faith who want to use their religion as a weapon against other people. I mean, I would imagine Christians like Frost, like Amanda Tyler, are probably the most angry when people who share their religion are complicit, in the hijacking of their faith. So good on them for calling it out. Love that clip. We need more Max Frost everywhere. Any questions about that bit? Nope. I'm going to keep going. All right, let's talk about Donald Trump just this once. So while he was in between going from courthouse to courthouse this week, Trump actually delivered a speech in New Hampshire where he was doing a campaign rally. And I'm going to play you a clip, but one of the things he said is, if you reelect me, I'm going to make sure immigrants who don't love our country don't get into it through legal means. And there's one part of it I want to highlight. I'm going to play the clip, then we'll talk about it. It's only about 30 seconds long.
To the United States. I don't think a lot of good things are going to happen. And I will implement strong ideological screening of all immigrants. If you hate America, if you want to abolish Israel, if you don't like our religion, which a lot of them don't, if you sympathize with jihadists, then we don't want you in our country, and you are not getting in, right? We don't want you. Get out of here. You're fired.
He actually said, "You're fired." He said, "I don't want to let certain immigrants here." He's not talking about like Swedish people. But notice what he pointed out. If you hate America, what does that even mean? What if you criticize America? Does that mean you hate it? Because Republicans think anyone who criticizes America hates it. But he also said, and this is the part I really care about. Oh, by the way, and he said, if you sympathize with jihadists, as if that describes any significant number of people who are trying to get to America. Weird. But he said, if you don't like our religion, which a lot of them don't. So in a country of like 330 million people, founded on the principle of religious freedom, I would like to know, which religion is our religion? And if you don't need to ask, it's probably because you already know the answer. It's whatever form of Christianity is practiced by the white evangelicals who make up Trump's base. Like, it's definitely not Islam. I would mention other religions, but they don't count because Trump has no idea what they are. But again, our religion, by the way, I want to make this clear. Our religion is not Christianity, because white evangelicals who like Donald Trump, they don't think progressive Christians or less fundamentalist Christians or pro-choice Christians or LGBTQ accepting Christians or Christians who challenge them, they don't think any of them are true Christians. So we're not talking about Christianity. We're talking about a specific type of it, a malignant type of it. And I know it's easy to ignore Trump's statement because he says crazy shit all the time. And I don't think there was a lot of media attention paid to that particular comment, but it is disturbing. He's saying it's okay to ban immigrants from coming into this country by legal means based solely on their religious label. That should infuriate all of those conservatives who say, I love the Constitution, because the Constitution very specifically has rules about not allowing that to happen. But of course, none of those people care. They don't care if Trump wants to hijack the Constitution. They're all for religious freedom when it benefits them. They are nowhere to be found when it comes to defending other religions. If a Christian bigot wants to use faith to override anti-discrimination laws, that's fine. If a Muslim from a place Trump calls a shithole country wants to legally come to America, too bad for them, right? It troubles me that Trump frames religious minorities as basically equivalent to people who hold other abhorrent views, as if not practicing our religion is the same as being a terrorist or something. Like, it would be so easy for people looking to shove people into those little boxes. It would be very easy for them to do it, because if you're criticizing America, which a lot of people, including myself, do, it doesn't mean you hate America, but they will say you do. A lot of Americans question Israel's right-wing politics and fairly point out that innocent Palestinians, including children, are dying with the Israeli war efforts. Does that mean they want to abolish Israel? No, of course not. But that won't stop MAGA cultists from saying all that. This is how conservative Christians work, though. For years, they act like their specific brand of Christianity is the only one that counts. They lie, as I mentioned earlier, with that David Barton-esque sort of history, and pretend the founding fathers were in the business of promoting their faith and not creating a framework for religious diversity. They install judges who give conservative Christian views preference over everyone else's. Or if you're Neil Gorsuch, you could lie about it so you can get the outcome you want. They draft legislation to advance their faith. And to be clear, this is not a fringe group of people who are doing this. In fact, let me show you one thing right here. Here we go. A few years, was it last year? This is last year. 1 year ago today, to be honest. There we go. Pew Research Center published a report saying 45% of Americans say the U.S. should be a Christian nation. And here's the part that is worth looking at right there, that part. And notice look at what they asked. Do you think, in the middle here, do you think the U.S. should be a Christian nation? And in the blue, right, it says 45% said yes. Next question. Do you think the U.S. is now a Christian nation? And a third of Americans said yes. And of course, the trick here is that the researchers did not define Christian nation. They just left that open. But people were like, I think they just assumed Christianity is synonymous with good. And so they're like, yeah, sure, we're a Christian nation. But when you ask them specifics about what that looked like, and I'm not going to dig into all those details right now, but when you ask specifics, like what would a Christian nation look like, they rejected what conservative Christians are selling. So yay for that. But this is why Trump can talk about our religion and just assume everyone in his base knows what he's talking about. He doesn't have to say the specifics out loud. They will fill in the blanks themselves. But what he said should be anathema to the very idea of our country. It is deeply unpatriotic to shut the doors of our country to anyone who doesn't pledge allegiance to Republican Jesus. And by the way, if a political leader in Saudi Arabia or Iran, said professing belief in our religion was a prerequisite to coming to our country, we would call that indoctrination or brainwashing or cult-like behavior. So how come Trump and people like him get a pass? Maybe that's because like 99% of the Republicans in Congress are Christian, or maybe it's because they have no backbone when it comes to condemning Trump. But again, when so many Republicans are pushing the same rhetoric, this is not just Trump saying something crazy. And I know I'm on a high horse here, but like America doesn't have a religion. It welcomes all of them just as it welcomes people who reject them all. Doesn't mean every religion deserves respect, but that religious differences aren't going to prevent someone from becoming or living as an American. And also, it's weird that Trump says that because Trump doesn't have a religion. He worships himself. And I know his comment wasn't like theological, it was just political. But it is telling that white evangelicals just don't care about any of this stuff. What questions do we got there? He doesn't even have religion. Yeah, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean he's an atheist. I don't want to take, he's not in my tribe. But I don't think he thinks about this stuff ever. I think he's apathetic when it comes to religion. He says he's a Christian, but I think in practice, what does that mean? It doesn't mean much of anything. I don't think he's an atheist if you want to say, like, there has to be some sort of act of saying, does God exist? I don't believe God exists. I feel like you should have to do that bare minimum to call yourself an atheist. And I think he doesn't think about this stuff. So I think it's unfair to put that label on him. But I don't think he thinks about religion. He sees it as a tool to just bring stupid people into his fold. Like, he just knows, if I say the magic words, these people will vote for me. So I got to make sure I sprinkle in some Jesus and Bible in my speeches. And apparently it's that easy to win over these voters. Like, I think he figured that out. So that's what he does. We're not a nation based on Christianity. We're a majority Christian nation, but not by much and not for much longer. I was going to say, not for much longer. Christians, within like a few years, Christianity will be in the minority, and none of the above plus the other religions will be in the majority. So, I mean, it's not even a Christian nation if you want to define it by population or anything like that. Other questions there. Yeah, he worships himself, money, and sex. Not bad for, what is he, 77 at this point? He doesn't have money, apparently, relative to what he claims he has either. So, yeah. Messed up. All right, I'm going to move to a totally different story here. This one involves a guy named Mark Burns. And if you don't know Mark Burns, here's what you should do. Go on YouTube, look up CNN Mark Burns pastor, and you're going to find the greatest interview ever conducted. Because basically in 2016, Mark Burns was this black preacher who was all in on the Trump train. And so he would just go around telling everyone to vote for Donald Trump, which was not that easy to find at the time. And the reason I bring him up is that he recently posted on Facebook. I'm going to share this with you here if you could check this out. He posted this on Facebook. It's really long. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but check out the first few lines here. In response to the growing influence of the woke agenda in American public schools, I am proud to announce the upcoming establishment of Burns Military Christian Academy starting next school year. And I'm going to skip down to one more part here. Our school aims to instill good morals and a love of our country in our students while ensuring they are not exposed to LGBTQ, critical race theory, or woke teachings. Yeah, whatever. So he's going to open up a school, a military academy, and he's definitely not going to teach them anything that might be interesting. This is also interesting. Our curriculum will be based on the popular ABECA curriculum. If you don't know what ABECA is, it is a very popular Christian homeschooling curriculum that is notorious for misinformation, for dumbing down everything it teaches, and for the students who take it and who try to go on to a real college somewhere, they are not prepared for what college has in store for them. But that's what Mark Burns wants to teach. And I think this is the thing that really, really sold it. He has uniforms already picked out and a logo with a cross. I don't know. That looks very futuristic. He also says, by the way, somewhere in here, parents are supposed to wear the costume as well, to really show your dedication. The reason all of this is kind of hilarious, even though it's totally scary, is because the reason I want you to watch that interview on CNN is that in 2016, when Mark Burns was pushing all this stuff, he said on his church's website that he spent 6 years in the Army Reserve. Turns out that was a lie. He was like part of his state National Guard, which is fine, but he wasn't in the Army. He lied about it. And then he said he graduated from a college, and CNN contacted the college. And the college is like, that guy was here for like a semester. So he lied about his degree. And yet now he's opening a Christian military academy. Like, I've heard of stolen valor, but like this takes it to another level. And also, for a guy who is called for the establishment of a theocracy, this is a guy who offered up like a biblical defense of Donald Trump whenever he did horrible things. He is also a guy who said teachers who educate and accept LGBTQ people, if you educate kids about them, they should be charged with treason and then executed. That's who Mark Burns is. Like, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but I feel like the best case scenario here, in order to protect the children, is that this place never opens up. But if it never opens up, it's possible he just tells everyone, I'm starting this school. I need you to give me money so I can start this school. And then maybe it never opens up and then he just keeps the money. I'm not saying he's going to do that. I am saying that if that's how this plays out, it totally wouldn't surprise me. The other option is he actually does open this place and it'll be a hot mess. But that's a thing that is supposedly happening. Mark Burns is opening up a military Christian academy. Because the two things you want in the same sentence are Christian and military. And I'm sure these kids are not going to learn about the Crusades. All right. What questions do we have? Military indoctrination daycare. More like, absolutely. Scary stuff. That's what ABECA curriculum does too. Like, there's so many articles that have been written about those homeschooling curricula, and they're always like, they don't teach science. They teach faulty science that's backed up with Jesus stuff. They teach David Barton-esque history. Like, they're doing kids a disservice, and the parents think they're educating their kids. They're not. And the fact that this guy who's a notorious liar is just moving forward with purposeful misinformation, that's scary stuff. All right, I'm going to jump to a totally different story. We're getting to there's a couple more here, but I feel like these are worth mentioning. This is actually shocking to me. This week, Oklahoma's Attorney General, his name is Gentner Drummond. Imagine, stereotypically, what do you think Oklahoma's Attorney General is like? You know, you might think super conservative dude, Christian nationalist as well. Well, he filed a lawsuit to block the state from using taxpayer money to open up a religious charter school. That's a good thing. He's trying to stop the state from using public money for a private religious school. That's incredible. I'm going to show you that lawsuit in a second. But just to give you a brief background on this, because I have talked about this before, a few months ago, Oklahoma has something called the Statewide Virtual Charter School Board, and they approved an application from a place called St. Isidore of Seville Virtual Catholic Charter School. It's slated to open next year. And there was a lot of discussion about this over the course of months. A lot of board members, few of them, said they wanted nothing to do with this. It was a horrible idea. It was illegal. But two of them out of the five were like, this sounds great. And then one of the other three board members was replaced by another right-wing hack. So they had the 3 votes that they needed to move this forward. Also along the way, Ryan Walters, who's the superintendent of public education in the state, kept telling this board, you got to make this happen. This is good. Ryan Walters, famous Christian nationalist in the country. So he was pushing them to do it. But what's amazing is that, like, last year, the old attorney general actually agreed with the Christian nationalists. He wrote a whole like paper saying, this is totally legal what you're doing. It's okay. This is all kosher. Go ahead and move forward with it. Gentner Drummond, the current attorney general, beat that guy in a Republican primary last year, and then he won the general election very easily because it's Oklahoma. And what's amazing is after he took office, he actually said, hey, you know what the last guy wrote about the charter school? Well, I'm going to take that and I'm just going to rip it up. Doesn't count anymore. I withdraw that thing that he wrote, and I'm going to submit my own argument that this is a horrible idea. You should not move forward with this. Now, did the state listen to him? Did that board listen to him? No, they did not. They voted to approve it. And Ryan Walters was very happy. And actually, right after they approved it a couple months ago, church-state separation groups chimed in and decided to file a lawsuit over it. So this was in August. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, ACLU, a place called the Education Law Center, FFRF, they said they were suing the state to block the funding of the Catholic charter school because they called it a full-on assault on church-state separation and public education. It's a 70-page lawsuit, goes after every member of that virtual school board. And basically what one of the plaintiffs, one of the group's leaders said, it's hard to think of a clearer violation of the religious freedom of Oklahoma taxpayers and public school families than the state establishing a supposedly public school that is run as a religious school. So, right on. That was in August. We're still waiting to see how that plays out. I feel like it's an uphill climb. But what's amazing now is, like I said, the Oklahoma Attorney General this week has jumped into the mix. This is from his state website. Drummond files lawsuit against state virtual charter board members for violating religious liberty of Oklahoma taxpayers. That is incredible. And one of the things he says here is that, let me see if I could pull this up. Oh, I lied. I'm going to just pull back for a second here. One of the things that he said is that the board members who approved this contract have violated the religious liberty of every Oklahoman by forcing us to fund the teaching of a specific religious sect with our tax dollars. And then, because he is a Republican in Oklahoma, he said, today, Oklahomans are being compelled, here we go, to fund Catholicism. Oklahomans are being compelled to fund Catholicism. Because of the legal precedent created by the board's actions, tomorrow we may be forced to fund radical Muslim teachings like Sharia law. Like, calm down, dude. That's not where this is going. We're worried that a lot of public money that Oklahoma public schools need is going to be siphoned off by these religious schools. I'm not worried about Sharia law. But okay, you're right on principle. But check out one part of this lawsuit, which I really thought was interesting, because he didn't go that far in the actual lawsuit. Here you go. This is from his actual case. Make no mistake, if the Catholic Church were permitted to have a public virtual charter school, a reckoning will follow in which this state will be faced with the unprecedented quandary of processing requests to directly fund all petitioning sectarian groups. Yeah, he is absolutely right about that. You let the Catholic school get public funding, you can bet that progressive Christian groups are going to go for that. Islamic groups are going to go for that. I'm sure the Satanic Temple has an idea in the works, and the state wouldn't be allowed to say no out of fear of religious discrimination. It is better that they don't fund any sort of private religious school at all. So good on Oklahoma's attorney general for like doing the right thing? Question mark. Even the church-state separation groups issued a statement saying, we applaud Attorney General Drummond for his efforts to protect church-state separation. Allowing a religious public charter school like St. Isidore to operate would be a sea change for our democracy. And I know I've said this before, but without court intervention, this school will open next year. And over the first 5 years, it is expected to cost taxpayers over $26 million. That is money that will not be going to the public schools in the state, and Oklahoma's public schools need that kind of money. Now, I'll stop there for a second. Any other questions there? I mean, my teen son was inculcated by my parents and is now at a super Catholic high school. I just got back from parent teacher conferences. His US history text is from the Catholic Textbook Project. I am not familiar with the Catholic Textbook Project. And here's the thing about Catholic schools. Some of them are fine education wise. Like they do a good job. And yeah, there is some of the prayer shit that goes on. But if you ask people who have attended those schools, it's like, yeah, we had to do it. No one actually cared. No one paid attention. But the education might be okay. Depends on the school. I don't see as many news stories or lawsuits or anything like that that says Catholic school indoctrination when it comes to things like history or science. It's never as bad as what you see in private Christian schools, Protestant schools, some of these charter schools or homeschool curricula. So he may be at a super Catholic high school. I don't know necessarily, without having more details, how bad that is. I hope that means your parents, though, are paying for tuition. At least maybe there's that going for them. I don't know. I have a weird feeling about Catholic schools in general. For what it's worth, full disclosure, I got my master's degree from a Catholic school. It's the only place that offered a program that worked with my schedule. And I just did my work and got out of there. And no one talked about religion at any point. And it was fine. I liked it. So anyway, any other questions there? How is Christian fundamentalism different from Sharia law? It depends where we are talking about. Like it's so much more theoretical here. Christian fundamentalism in the US is like, we want to punish trans people. We want to punish gay people who are in love, and we don't want them to get married. But they don't necessarily have the state on their side. The Constitution goes against what they say. Usually with Sharia law in Islamic countries, like the state and the church are one and the same, and they can go to literally radical extremes when it comes to how they punish people for violating religious rules and stuff. Those are not necessarily the same. If you want to talk about specific issues or specific views they have, they might overlap in a lot of ways. But that's why I don't buy the comparisons to Sharia law when conservative Christians are talking about what might happen or anything, or even this Oklahoma guy saying if we allow the Christian school in, then it's a step closer to Sharia law. Like, dude, that's not at all what we're talking about. All right, I'm going to jump. Okay, I'm going to talk about this now because this is super important, and I don't think I have seen this covered in a lot of our circles. I'm going to work on an article, hopefully, to put out in the morning. But okay, this is the story involving the Southern Baptist Convention, because a lot of people involved with the Southern Baptist Convention are so mad right now at leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention. And it's kind of wild why they are mad at them. And I'm going to show you this right here. Check out this headline. This is from 2018. And basically it's saying this police officer from somewhere was sentenced to 15 years in a sex abuse case. Horrible story. And the thing about this story, let me tell you about that because this is relevant. That police officer, his name was Sean Jackman, and he adopted a baby girl at the age of 2 years old. Her name, and it is public, I don't think I'm not allowed to say this, her name is Samantha Killeri. She was adopted at the age of 2, and Sean Jackman allegedly sexually abused her until she was the age of 18. It just happened throughout her childhood, over and over. It's awful stuff. The only reason he was caught is because later on in her life, she recorded him admitting to what he did, and that allowed her to have him arrested, and he was eventually charged with crimes. And that article I just showed you was that in 2018, he was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. Like, good. I'm glad he's behind bars. Holy crap, what that woman must have gone through. Horrible stuff. But Killary, the woman in this story, she didn't say Jackman was the only guy who deserved to be punished. She said that he had a girlfriend at one point who worked in the police station with him. She knew that he was abusing her. She said Jackman's father knew what he was doing to her. And she said the police department, this is in Louisville, Kentucky, the police department also knew that all of these people knew he was abusing her. So she wanted to sue all of them as well for being complicit in this abuse. Now, she did file that lawsuit a few years ago, but a judge tossed out those cases against those other defendants. Why? Because the judge said the statute of limitations to bring this case has expired. You had 5 years after the abuse stops to bring forth these types of lawsuits. That was a long time ago. I think 2014 would have been the last time she could have brought these cases forward. The judge said, sorry, it's too late. The law doesn't allow for it. So over the past several years, we've talked about the Catholic Church sex abuse scandals and how a lot of state attorneys general have responded by pushing for laws that open up a window for those statute of limitations cases. Maybe they say, hey, if you were a victim of childhood sexual abuse and you want to file a lawsuit against the perpetrators or the institutions that harbored them, we're going to open up a window of like 2 years when anyone can file those lawsuits. Or maybe they extend the statute of limitations from like 5 years to 20 years, whatever it is. Well, in Kentucky, that is basically what they have done in the past few years. They have given victims more time to file those types of lawsuits. Like, they now have 10 years to file claims, not 5. And as of 2021, the law says you can file a lawsuit against organizations that harbor abusers, whether they're governmental or religious, which is interesting because that's exactly what Samantha Killary was trying to do, right? So now here's the question. Well, she was trying to do that. The case was dismissed. Can she bring forth that lawsuit now? Well, guess what? Yesterday, the Kentucky Supreme Court actually heard that case. Basically, they have to figure out if alleged abuse occurred before those laws changed and someone was blocked out by the statute of limitations from filing a lawsuit. Well, can they file those lawsuits now? Are those institutions, could they be in trouble? And we'll see what happens. I mean, you have victims' rights groups who say you have to give survivors more time to sue. It's important for the sake of justice. A lot of victims don't realize what happened to them until it's too late to file the lawsuit. And even people who are aware of what's happening to them may feel hesitant to go after their alleged assailants in court. So allowing older cases of abuse to be tried in court, like now, that is so important to fix the mistakes of the past. On the other side, you have conservative Christians who say, like, no, we don't want to open that. We don't want to open that. What's the phrase I'm looking for? I don't know. We don't want to do it. And there is some defense for that position because if a victim of abuse that happened decades and decades ago, if they want to sue someone for what happened then, it's possible the defendant's memory isn't as clear. It's possible that exculpatory evidence isn't as available now as it might have been in the past. But critics would just say, guess what? The passage of time doesn't whitewash the crimes that may have occurred. Plus, standards of evidence still apply, like the burden of proof still exists. If someone is convicted of sexual abuse, who cares when it happened? Let the survivors have their day in court, and let's see what happens. But if you follow these stories when it comes to the Catholic Church, you know the Catholic Church has fought all of these types of opening the windows, extending the statute of limitations. They've always tried to fight that because they know if victims are allowed to sue their perpetrators and the institutions that harbor them, the Catholic Church is screwed. And they have been. They filed bankruptcy all over the country, a lot of dioceses. Now, you would think that Southern Baptists, who have over the past couple of years gone through their own public reckoning dealing with sexual abuse in their own world, you would think they want to avoid siding with abusers and that they would be supportive of the victims. But this is what's amazing. When reporters started digging into this particular case that was in front of the Kentucky Supreme Court this week, they found, I'm going to show you this. This is the document that came up. Check this out. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Commonwealth of Kentucky Supreme Court. This is the case involving Jackman, the father, I believe, these other people, Samantha Killary. And this is what's called an amicus brief. This is saying we have nothing to do with this case, but we have very strong feelings about the outcome because it may affect us. So we want to tell the court, all the justices, how they ought to rule. And look at who wrote this amicus brief. The Southern Baptist Convention, Executive Committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and Lifeway Christian Resources. That's also Southern Baptist affiliated, in support of the abusers. They filed a brief telling the court, hey, you cannot allow any of these lawsuits to proceed because if you do, holy shit, the Southern Baptist Convention will be in so much trouble. And they literally say that, like, in this argument, in this case, they actually say that the SBC, where did it go? I'm going to show you this part in the lawsuit. Here we go. I don't know how to say this word, amici, whatever. We have a strong interest in the statute of limitations issue presented in this appeal. We, Southern Baptists, are all named defendants in another lawsuit involving a Kentucky court that involves allegations of childhood sexual abuse dating back to 2003. We are not accused of doing the stuff you're talking about, but we are the institution, like this third party, who were, I'm going to just summarize. They're saying if you allow this to happen, we're screwed. That's why they filed this lawsuit. And it's like no one, they apparently filed this back in April. No one knew about it until like 2 days ago or something, 3 days ago. And Southern Baptists who have been working to reform the SBC and make it better for victims to report bad behavior and for the institution to change, they are so mad about this. Here's one statement that was released, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. This is a statement released by a Caring Well training team. These are like professionals who have a vested interest in reforming the SBC when it comes to sexual abuse, and advisors and members of the Task Force and Past Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force. These are Southern Baptist leaders who were put in charge of helping the SBC deal with all the sexual abuse cases they were struggling with. And these people have now written a letter. It's not a letter to the court. It's just a public statement. And what are they saying in this thing? They are saying this brief, here we go. Can you see that? I know it's tiny font, but at the top here, this brief and the policy arguments made in it were made without our knowledge and without our approval. Moreover, they do not represent our values and positions. It has long been recognized that access to the justice system is a fundamental part of identifying and stopping abusers, as well as creating lasting, effective reform to protect the next generation. By taking this stand against access to the justice system, check this out. The leaders who approved this position have joined with the Catholic Church, powerful insurance companies, Michigan State University, and many others who have sought to close the halls of our courts to survivors of abuse. And it was a choice to stand against every survivor in Kentucky. And holy crap, that is a strong statement. You know it's bad for the Catholic Church when the Southern Baptist Convention people are saying, you guys are acting like Catholics here. And by the way, they pointed out, like, we know the concerns that if you open up older cases, there may be valid factual questions about what happened. But by opposing this case in front of the court and by siding with the abusers, it is a deliberate effort, they said, to ensure those questions are never asked. There was also one more statement I want to show you. This one comes from 3 women who have been open about the fact, here we go, that they were victims of sexual abuse. And the one thing they said, this is Megan Lively, Jules Woodson, and Tiffany Thigpen. They've been, for years now, courageous and outspoken about the need to reform the SBC. The thing they said, if I can find it here, I lied. I can't find it in here, but it is in here somewhere. I'll just point to that here. They said the SBC, Southern Baptist Convention, proactively chose to side against a survivor and with an abuser and the institution that enabled his abuse. These are the same arguments made repeatedly by organizations rife with the cover-up of sexual abuse, including the Catholic Church. And you could see here, as survivors, what are we asking for? And the first one is just for other people to stand with us to denounce that decision to file the amicus brief. They also want SBC churches, member bodies, to denounce what they did, to denounce the costs and the pain being shown against survivors. And also they're saying, we want to see how much you're spending to do this legal argument here. Who wrote the brief? Some lawyer had to do it. How much did you pay that person? How much money have you spent fighting in support of abusers versus how much money you are spending to help victims, supposedly? Which is a fair question. If the SBC actually cares about victims, are they putting more money into fighting this law or helping the people who suffered under their watch? And that's a fair question. I don't know how this case is going to get decided. It just got heard, but it raises so many questions about who thought this was a good idea to ask the Kentucky Supreme Court, hey, we have a vested interest in this case, so please side with the abusers. Who thought that was a good idea? Who in Southern Baptist Convention leadership thought this amicus brief, which they absolutely did not have to file, was worth their time and energy? And if the end result is that victims could get justice against their assailants and the institutions that gave those assailants cover, why does the SBC feel the need to get in the way rather than, maybe face some consequences, which would be well-deserved, for their role in all of this? I mean, I know why they don't want that to happen, but if they say we need to face consequences here, we are trying to reform ourselves, then guess what? That means taking punishment, taking the heat for what you all did. I mean, and I kind of wonder, what are Southern Baptists who are just church-going people, what are they going to do about all this? Are they just going to look the other way? Are they going to ignore all this? Or are they going to admit, you know what, maybe this institution is not worth our time and our money, and maybe I still believe in God, but I don't have to be a part of this church, because that's what would actually cause them to change some of their ways. So it's a fascinating story. I'm very curious to see how this all plays out. Any other questions here? They don't want precedents holding them accountable. Yeah, I mean, if you open that door, a lot of people may sue the Southern Baptist Convention. They definitely don't want that. Other questions here. What's the point of a statute of limitations anyway? Mostly saying, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I think there is some sense to say if a crime happened and you're waiting like 50 years, let's say, to bring a lawsuit, maybe there's a reason to think this doesn't really affect you as much. So, there's a time frame where you could say someone committed a crime against me. I want them punished, and I think I have the evidence to back it up. So I want the courts to adjudicate this. And I get that it makes sense to do that in a reasonable time frame because, again, if there's evidence, we want to see it now. If there are witnesses, we want this to happen now. It gets a lot harder for justice to happen when a lot of time has passed between the act and, the trial. So that's the point of it. I don't have a problem with statute of limitations in theory, but at least in sexual abuse cases, childhood sexual abuse cases, there's so much writing, scholarly writing that has been done to say that those victims, they might be in their 30s or 40s before they realize that what they experienced as a child was not normal, that it was not okay. And maybe it was a priest, maybe it was a parent or a relative. But like you grow up and you think, oh, this is a normal touch. And when you get older, and let's say you get married or you're dating, you realize, oh, that was not normal at all. But if 20 years have passed between those occasions and the courts say you can't bring a lawsuit, what do you do at that point to get any sense of justice, especially if that person's still walking around potentially with other victims? So I like that some states have said, you know what, that's true. We want to give those people a chance to file a lawsuit if they want to. So we will open that window or we will extend the statute of limitations. How is everything so perfect in America that it just can't be improved at all? If we agree there can be improvement, let's talk about how to do that. Why are they so obstructionist? I know you don't say, Drew, who you are talking about there, but that could apply to so many people, right? Again, it's progress. That's what we're working toward. Like liberals don't hate the country. Liberals want the country to be better. And it's so frustrating when Republicans, conservative Christians, whoever it is, are so dead set on keeping things the way they are. I think the shooting that happened in Maine is just a perfect example of that. We know what it takes to lower mass shootings, to make sure they are rare occurrences, because every other country in the world knows how to do it. I don't know, register guns, get a license before anyone can have them. Make sure no one can have them except for certain trained people. Again, none of that's happening because Republicans don't want it to happen. That's just one example. There are so many. Before I forget, you got a shout out on Leftist Mafia last night. Super Chat asked if they would have you on as a guest, and they said yes. I have no idea what that show is. I'm sorry, but cool. Invite me. I'm around. I got nothing else to do. Any other questions there? All right, I'm gonna skip one other story for now because it's getting late. I know. I do want to show you our friend Greg Locke. He did something I wasn't actually expecting this week. Instead of just spreading lies about history, doing his MAGA cultist preaching in the circus tent he calls a church, he did two things. One is he spread a very different type of conspiracy theory. And then there was one other thing. I will let you figure out what that is. It's a 40-second clip. Enjoy this one because I certainly raised my eyebrows when I heard it.
Of course we've been lied to by the government. Okay, I get that. Of course you can fake pictures. I get that. Do I believe we went to the moon? No. And you ought to sue your brain for non-support if you do believe we went to the moon. Nobody ever went to the moon. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. 50 years and we ain't been back, got more technology in your hand that they had to send a rocket up 50 years ago. Of course, we've never been to the moon, okay? Him and all these Twitter people, okay, we've never been to the moon, so go ahead and clip it and get me a Newsweek this week, whatever. Shut up.
In case you're wondering, it's very nice to live in his head rent-free all the time. So he thinks the moon landing was a hoax, which I thought we were done with that conspiracy theory, but nope, he is still riding that one, which is weird of all the conspiracies he could go for. And then let's talk about the other aspect of this. He's very clearly saying, all right, I'm going to see it and I'm going to clip it and I'm going to share it. And I have had some people say when I do clip that and share that, why are you doing that? You're giving him exactly what he wants. You're amplifying his crazy. Why bother doing that? And it goes back to what I said about Mark Johnson, the Speaker of the House, earlier, which is that I do think it is important that when these insane, deranged preachers say crazy stuff, it is important to document it, to show people it is happening. Because I'll tell you what, when you live in a rural part of Tennessee, like Greg Locke does, I am fully convinced that within a year or two, he's going to run for like state legislature. And it is deeply concerning to me that there might be voters who might see the R next to his name and just decide to vote for him. And they have no idea the sort of crazy shit he believes and that he parrots every week from that circus tent. So I do, even if he knows I'm going to do it, I do think it's important people see what he actually believes. When it comes to the vaccines, when it comes to COVID, when it comes to anything, that stuff is important. So, I mean, it's almost comically stupid what he was saying, but I do think it is so important that everyone understands what this guy believes, because there's no way in hell he's ever going to be satisfied just being the pastor of a church that is a church like the one he runs. He doesn't want to be around those people. He loves it when like other right-wing MAGA people surround him and he feels like he's as famous as they are. Like all the people who got indicted for all the Trump stuff in the past few weeks and months, like he wishes he was in that crowd. And he will be. He'll try to either run for something. And that is scary, but that's all the more reason it's important to document this guy. I'm going to show you a few more weird tweets of Lori Alexander, and we'll call it a night here. Some of these were just something. Here is one I want to show you that Lori Alexander, the transformed wife, tweeted this week. Here we go. Let me blow this up a little bit. They're having something at the elementary school near us that encourages children to express yourself. Its hidden agenda is for children to change genders, take pills that will destroy their health, and cut off body parts. Weep for the children. Protect your children. Holy hell. The elementary school said, express yourself. That's like, hey kids, have fun with 3 colors instead of 2. Like, just be artistic, be yourself, have some fun. And she immediately jumps to, the school is trying to indoctrinate them by telling them to express themselves. How warped does your mind have to be if they say, just be yourself, be creative? And she jumps to, I hate trans people. But that's what fundamentalism will do to you. Here's the next one that I thought was insane. She was just on a roll this week. When I was in elementary school, the only thing taught in sex ed to the girls was about their period in about 6th grade. That's it. No boys were in the class. Even then, we were all embarrassed. It's heartbreaking what they're teaching children today. First of all, learning about your period is not sex ed. Like that's not good sex ed if that's all you're learning in it. But also, like, fine, teach girls about their period. Is 6th grade the right age for that? I'm not sure. Learning about your period in 6th grade, when I'm sure it's already happening for some girls at that point, that seems late. But also, think about what her and other women like her are worried that people are teaching children. Because I don't know, I hover between laughing and crying when I hear what conservatives think kids are learning about in health class. Like they're not learning about positions so much. Like what? They're learning about what sex is, what safe sex is, what the options are. And that stuff is important because most of these kids are, if they're learning the stuff on their own, it's probably not from very reliable or trustworthy sources. If they're probably not getting it from their parents, because that's an awkward conversation for everybody. I know they're not getting it from their churches. And so it is important to teach kids sex ed. And she's apparently mad. She wants to go back to the good old days when no one learned anything about sex that was useful. And we all just moved on with our lives. Like, that's a horrifying idea. And my God, I remember, I know my teacher was joking about this when I was in elementary school, but basically she joked that as we're going through like the vocabulary list for sex ed, maybe this is like 5th grade or something, we're going through the vocabulary. And as we go through the vocab, kids in the room are giggling at the mentions of those words. And the teacher basically joked that our final exam in this unit was just going to be saying all those words without laughing. But then we actually got an education on what that stuff was. And it was important. Even if we didn't know what it all meant, like it's important to get introduced to the concepts, understand what you're getting into, because this is what leads to a lot of scary, quiverful families and people with no emotional intelligence. And that's scary. Here's another one from her. We're almost done here, but I can't not let you see this. This is her marital advice. How do you stop quarreling with your husband? Share your thoughts and opinions with him. Have a discussion, but stop when you feel yourself becoming upset and demanding that you're right. And this is the part that you got to read, because even if you are, you're wrong. How's that for marital advice? How do you stop fighting? Just shut up. Even if you're right and your spouse is wrong, guess what? You are wrong. I feel like if I say that to my partner, that's never going to go over well, as it shouldn't. But this idea that if a woman is right, she should just shut up anyway and let her husband be wrong because he's her master, she is submissive to him. Such bad, horrible, harmful advice right there. That's scary. And by the way, she had one more piece of advice I wanted to share with you, and it has to do with advice for women whose partners are not faithful. Let me play this for you, and then we will talk about it.
The first thing you need to examine is your own behavior and yourself as a wife to him. Is there anything that you possibly did that could have pushed him away? Like not having an open door policy sexually, being available to him, being a quarrelsome, contentious, nagging wife that will push husbands away, not being a good housekeeper or a helpmate to him, not fixing food that he likes.
If someone has an affair, I'm just saying blaming it on the woman for not cooking him the right food or for being for nagging him. I feel like any qualified marital therapist would say, no, none of that is accurate. Not her fault. Stop blaming her. And what's Lori saying? Like, no, you should blame yourself. He did this because of you. You should examine yourself. Like, that is horrible, horrible, harmful advice right there. And I want to share that with you because one, it's horrible advice. It is advice a lot of Christian conservative women get. But two, I'm showing you her tweets, and I know a lot of you are like, her husband writes those tweets. Like, no, she's a real person. She says stupid stuff in real life. She exists. Like, don't gaslight me. She's a real person. She's not just a parody. All right, I'll stop there. If there's any last questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, it's late. We can all go to bed. Dan, any other questions right there? Express yourself sounds so wholesome. Seriously, why the fuck does she take it in that direction? Good question. I don't know. Express yourself is the least offensive way they could have put that too. It's totally fine. I hope she never lights a match. What with all that gaslighting? Well played. Yeah, seriously. She just wants women to think they are responsible for everything a man does. And by the way, she said that about an affair. She says the same thing about abuse, spousal abuse. Like, it is dangerous stuff that conservative Christian women and pastors say to young women in like purity culture environments. And again, this goes back to the lack of sex ed too. When you don't have the emotional IQ or the understanding to learn about this stuff, or the experience to deal with this stuff, they believe it. They believe these harmful ideas, and that's messed up for all sorts of obvious reasons. Other questions here? Someone asked, am I related to... Here we go. Am I related to Zubin Mehta? I have gotten that before. The conductor. The answer is no, not directly. But I'm Indian. I have a lot of relatives. He's probably a second cousin. I'm not sure. Other questions there. While you are looking through that, I will just throw this down there one more time. Obligatory. Thank you in advance for anyone who wants to do that. You can find me at friendlyatheist.com. It's free to subscribe to get my articles. And if you are on YouTube right now, go subscribe. Why haven't you done that? Make the bell ring or whatever it is that happens. I should post like that. Maybe I should do one of those unwrapping videos for the fancy plaque they send you when you hit that 100,000 milestone. I haven't received it yet. Maybe soon. I should do a thing. Cool. In that case, thank you, Den, for helping out with the moderation. As always, thank you all who are watching this. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend.